England didn't fade away. It didn't grow over and crumble. It collapsed in a single blood-soaked day. On October 14 TH 1066, one man stood at the center of the storm. By sunrise, he was a king. By sunset, he was dead. His name was Harold Godwinson, and when he drew his final breath, Saxon England died right alongside him. This is the true story of the man who lost England in just one day. History doesn't always turn on great battles or famous speeches. Sometimes, it just turns on bad weather. But in the year 1064, Harold Godwinson, the most powerful man in England, boarded a ship and set sail into the English Channel. We're not entirely sure why. Maybe it was a diplomatic mission. Maybe it was about politics. Or maybe it was just fate. What we do know is this: a violent storm hit his ship, tearing it completely off course. The waves smashed it against the shores of a place called Bayeux, a hostile land ruled by a man named Count Guy. Now, according to medieval law, anything that washed up on shore belonged to the local lord. That meant cargo, gold, and even men. So Harold Godwinson, the brother-in-law of the King of England, was dragged from the water and thrown into a dungeon. Suddenly, the most powerful man in England was a prisoner, and the news of a prize like that travels fast. Way down south, in Normandy, Duke William heard the news. William was ruthless, brilliant, and unbelievably ambitious. He immediately understood that Harold Godwinson wasn't just a prisoner, he was leverage. William forced Count Guy to hand Harold over. But William wasn't some brute jailer. He did something far more clever, and far more dangerous. He treated Harold as a guest of honor. There were lavish feasts, exciting hunts, and even military campaigns together. It was all about building a sense of brotherhood. William even invited Harold to fight beside him in Brittany. On the battlefield, Harold proved his courage, famously rescuing Norman soldiers from quicksand near Mount St. Michel, a moment that's immortalized in the Bayeux Tapestry. Then came the gifts. William gave Harold weapons and the armor in a big public ceremony. In the medieval world, this was a huge deal. It was a symbol of submission. A lord arms a vassal, his subordinate. William was quietly rewriting the story, positioning Harold beneath him in the eyes of all of Europe. And then, he played his final card of the oath. Right there in William's court, Harold was made to swear a solemn oath. Norman sources claim it was sworn on sacred relics, the holy bones of saints that were secretly hidden under the tablecloth. And what was the promise? That Harold would support William's claim to the English throne when the time came. The Bayeux Tapestry shows this moment clearly. You see Harold standing there, looking a bit uneasy, with his hands on the reliquaries. The text simply says, Harold made an oath to Duke William. What it doesn't say is why he made it, or under what conditions. Because Harold wasn't free. He was a captive, just dressed up like a guest. And in medieval law, a oath sworn under duress, under threat, was completely worthless. William knew this, but the truth didn't matter. What mattered was the story he could tell. Fast forward to January 5 TH ke 1066. King Edward the Confessor died. He had no more children, and no more Clara. The very next day, England's ruling council, the Witan, gathered for an emergency meeting. Their duty wasn't to follow a bloodline. It was to ensure the kingdom's survival. They needed a leader who could defend the realm from its enemies. So they chose the strongest, most capable man they knew. They chose Harold Godwinson. On January 6 TH, Harold was crowned King of England. It was all done lawfully, publicly, and legitimately. But across the channel, William of Normandy was furious. He declared Harold a usurper, a liar, and an oath-breaker, a man who had been damned by God himself. And William decided to take his case to the highest authority in the Christian world. He took it to Rome. William knew he needed more than just an army. He needed God on his side. So his messengers went to the Pope and told him a very specific version of events. First, they claimed King Edward had promised the throne to William. Second, they said Harold had broken a sacred, holy oath. And third, they promised that William would reform England's supposedly corrupt church. The Pope agreed, or at least, that's what William claimed he did. Norman historians wrote that a special banner from the Pope flew at the head of William's army. Whether this was real or just brilliant propaganda, the effect was devastating. This was no more longer just a war of conquest, it was a holy war. Harold's entire reign as King of England lasted just 9 months, and it was probably the worst year in history to be a king. First, the Vikings showed up. In September tahun 1066, a massive Norse army invaded the north of England. Harold marched his army up Sir and he completely annihilated them at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. It was an incredible, decisive victory, but it came at a huge cost. His army was exhausted, and just days later, the real storm broke. William landed in the south. Harold had to force march his tired army 300 miles back down the lengths of England. They arrived worn out and undermanned, but Harold didn't back down. He didn't retreat. He chose to stand and fight for his kingdom. Oktober 14 TH, ke-1066. The Battle of Hastings began at dawn. For hours, the Saxon shield walls held firm against the Norman attacks. William's cavalry charged again and again, and broke again and again. At one point, William's army was on the verge of total collapse. But time is always on the side of an invader who has fresh reserves. The Normans used feigned retreats to lure the Saxons out, and brought in fresh troops, keeping up the relentless pressure. And then, it happened. An arrow. We don't know for sure if it struck him in the eye, or if he was shot down by knights moments later. All we know is that King Harold Godwinson fell, and with him fell the last Saxon King of England. By nightfall, the battle was over. England belonged to the Normans. History remembers William as the conqueror, but to be a conqueror, you need something else. You need someone to lose. Harold Godwinson wasn't a traitor, a perjurer, or a usurper. He was the lawfully chosen King of England, who was simply overwhelmed by a perfect storm of bad luck, bad timing, and a very well-told lie. England didn't fall because Harold was a weak leader. It fell because history gave him no more good choices. And in one single, terrible day, an entire civilization vanished. Empires are not always destroyed by villains. Sometimes, they fall on the shoulders of good men who were just standing in the wrong place on the worst day in history. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and join us as we uncover more of the forgotten truths of the past. Because history isn't just what happened, it's the story that survives. Thanks for watching.